Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to another response video. This one is also about the Borg versus the Cybermen. I know that I've done one about this topic before, but that was in response to Roland Review's video, and that response, I think, is sort of outdated now, because now I've seen more stuff to do with the Borg. I've seen like 1 or 2 episodes from Star Trek shows featuring the Borg, and now I have also seen First Contact, the movie. So I'm a bit more familiar with the Borg. I'm a bit more, familiar with what they're capable of. And with the Cybermen, I've done even more research, and I've rewatched a bunch of Doctor Who episodes. So I'm even more knowledgeable on the Cybermen now. I have a lot more sources that I can throw at the screen. And I did that all in preparation for this video, where I am now responding to this video, or I guess this video series, made by Fiction Rant, another guy who's obviously made a Borg versus Cybermen crossover versus thing that I think it's wrong. Point is, I think he's wrong. I think, similar to Roland Review, I think he's extremely misinformed about the Cybermen in these videos, and I'm basically just going to go through and prove why he's wrong. So yeah, let's just get started on that, shall we?
Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to start up another versus series, the Borg from Star Trek versus the Cybermen from Doctor Who. Just like with my previous versus series, I'm going to be considering each side in 6 major categories: speed, weaponry, defenses, numbers, unique advantages, and tactics, before finally giving my verdict on which side wins and why. This particular conflict, I think, will be super interesting because the factions involved are actually really super similar in how they operate. They're both incapable of natural reproduction to bolster their numbers, but instead assimilate, or in the case of the Cybermen, upgrade, humanoid species into their ranks, typically by force. In this particular case, I'm going to try to use the most up-to-date information on each faction I can find, as opposed to picking a specific time frame. Doctor Who, in particular, makes actually picking a specific time frame point of reference for the Cybermen basically impossible, since every time they show up, it's inevitably a huge time jump in time frame and location, one direction or another. Sometimes there's very little change, sometimes there's massive changes. As for the Borg, most of the attention paid to them in any series was during Voyager, but I'll do what I can to include more up-to-date information from Picard as well. As with my previous comparisons, the matchups in my final verdict will be broken down into different combat theaters, those being a 1v1 ship battle, fleet versus fleet, soldier versus soldier, army versus army, and who would dominate in a galactic conflict spanning as much time as is necessary for such a conflict to resolve. We also need to make a couple concessions for these factions for the galactic conflict scenario, so it can actually be interesting. First, I'll be assuming that plenty of worlds are available, populated by generic humanoids that can be assimilated or upgraded, so each faction can have access to as many people as they can reasonably get their hands upon, since they can't bolster their numbers naturally. Second, all the technology works. I'll be digging deeper during my research on this matchup, but the reason I bring this up is because the signature Borg faster-than-light travel, transwarp, requires artificially constructed transwarp corridors spread across the galaxy to function. In Star Trek, there's a massive network of these spanning the galaxy, and while the Borg have certainly built more of them over the years, the initial network was not constructed by them, which is ultimately good for the rest of the Star Trek galaxy, since if they had, that would mean that they'd already invaded and controlled every area where their transwarp corridors could reach, so the plot lines involving Borg would basically not happen. Everything would be Borg. So, for the purposes of this comparison, potentially among other things, there will be an established transwarp corridor network for the Borg to use without them having to conquer the region and construct them first. As far as I know at the moment, the Cybermen have no such infrastructure limitations on their technology, but I'll be doing some digging to confirm this as I do this series. So there you have it. Borg versus Cybermen should be an interesting matchup. I've at least got a good foundational knowledge of both factions from having watched most of Star Trek and tons of Doctor Who, even including the legacy pre-reboot stuff from the 60s and onward, though most of that old stuff won't contribute much to the power level of the Cybermen. The real power inflation happens in the reboot series. All that said, I welcome all comments pointing towards things that I've missed or gotten wrong regarding either faction. So stay tuned. I look forward to doing this comparison. Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 2 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will discuss how fast the ships and soldiers in each universe can move at both sublight and faster than light, or FTL, speeds. This section is going to be very lopsided in terms of available information, mainly because the Borg, while still mysterious in Star Trek, are still relatively well documented. Meanwhile, with the Cybermen, their ships have only been represented on screen a handful of times, and on those occasions, they don't actually do much moving around. By its nature, Doctor Who does just a lot of teleporting around, so how fast anything is actually moving through space is basically never actually explained in any meaningful way, in particular with Cybermen ships. They're used more as a setting rather than something interacting with the setting most of the time. That is, the Doctor ends up aboard a Cyberman ship or something like that, and then has an adventure, as opposed to him being somewhere else and then watching on sensors as a bunch of cyber ships drop out of warp or something like that. All that to say, I have no idea how Cyberman FTL works or how fast it is. I just have to assume that they have it, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be much threat in the Doctor Who universe, especially because they seem to be able to traverse between galaxies.
Okay, so of course, I mean, this should be obvious. Like, he's assuming that they have it, of course, but like he said, they are able to traverse between different galaxies. They are an intergalactic empire. They're an intergalactic threat. So obviously they have warp of some kind, but we have seen it in action in the show, as seen here.
Shuttle theft in progress, leader. Human life signs aboard.
This is rough. It's making me feel sick.
Cyber warp tech, not designed for humans.
Piracy!
It is warp.
The ship is in warp drive. Interfere with the navigational system and we will disintegrate!
Your technology is primitive compared to ours. Mistakes will not be made.
So, we know for a absolute 100% fact that the Cybermen have warp tech FTL of some kind, right? But how fast is it and how exactly does it work? We don't really know. So overall, it really still doesn't matter, but I at least wanted to point out that we know for a fact that they do have it. This isn't an assumption, this isn't a, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but we know for a fact that they have this technology. And the rest of this video is basically just him going over the Borg warp tech, although I don't really think that matters anymore because we don't know how fast cyber warp tech is, we don't know how effective it is. He does also cover the individual unit travel speed, and I mean, it doesn't really say anything incorrect there. They are both fairly slow on the ground, they just kind of march or walk. But I'm going to skip the rest of this video and just go to the next point that I feel needs correcting.
Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 3 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will cover the weaponry utilized by each faction. In this particular comparison, I'm going to focus less on the actual definable destructive capabilities and more just on what's actually available, since, again, Doctor Who is really bad at documentation, and in particular, their ships really aren't even shown to be armed, and if they are, we never get to see those weapons in action.
Okay, so this part kind of makes my nerd blood boil, because no, this is not a, well, maybe they do, we don't know if they do, I'm assuming they do. No, the Cybermen absolutely do have weapons on their ships. This is a very weird claim to make. We have seen examples of these weapons in action.
Me too! I'm cooking Christmas dinner!
Being shot at by Cybermen!
Well, can't we do both?
Yeah, why not?
The Cybermen having these weapons have also been implied many times.
What are you doing?
Transmitting. My ship will lock onto my signal. It will tear this reality, but this planet will remain only in shreds.
This world doesn't end in 1816. It can't.
It will.
They have lasers, they have missiles, they have stuff that they can use in naval battles. The Cyber Empire is a galactic empire. It's an intergalactic threat that has gone to war with many humanoid races. Why would they not have weapons on their spaceships in a universe where other factions have weapons on their spaceships? It's just not adding up. It doesn't make sense to think that they don't. You'll see this a lot throughout the videos, but whenever he refers to cyber ships, he only ever shows one image of this one ship right here for some reason, but they have way more ships types than just that. It's not just that ship that he's showing. I feel like I don't know why he's just showing that one ship. It's weird. But they have many different ship types. We've seen them assembling fleets of great sizes. They even have carriers that can carry large amounts of troops and take them from one place to another.
I raided one of these carriers once. Nearly got fried to death. Good times. Cyber control should be just down here.
Wait, is this a cyber ship? War carrier. We get this working, it can get us to Kashamas.
They absolutely have all these things. They absolutely have warp technology. They absolutely have weapons on their ships. They have different ship types. I don't really understand why he's assuming they might not have these things. I mean, these are all very basic things for a, galactic scale empire or a galactic scale threat to have. And I don't mean to bring this up in like a condescending or insulting way, but I mean, he did say that he was going to do a bit of digging, a bit of research for this, this conversation, this matchup. But and to be fair, this video was made 2 years ago, so maybe this image, this article, wasn't posted yet that time ago, right? So maybe he just wasn't able to see it as easily as I can now. But when you look up Doctor Who's cyber ships on Google and go to images, that picture of the cyber flagship firing its weapons is the third result. Now again, I can take in mind that maybe it wasn't there when he was making this video. Maybe it's a relatively recent addition, but I still want to point out that this isn't really hard stuff to find.
The Borg have a variety of weapons on their ships, including powerful cutting beams and torpedoes which are capable of destroying enemy ships in just a couple hits. These weapons, combined with the defensive capabilities of their ships, make Borg ships insanely tough, typically requiring entire fleets of enemy vessels to bring down a single cube. Basically, in terms of ship-to-ship combat, it seems that traditional ship-to-ship combat really isn't a priority for the Cybermen, so that particular matchup is going to be pretty one-sided, since without any evidence of cyber ships even being armed at all, I'm not going to assume that they can take on Borg ships particularly effectively. Where things get more interesting is on foot. Starting with the Borg, each drone is superhumanly strong and can be customized to fulfill whatever needs the collective has at the time, but what seems to be pretty standard on most drones is, for one, an eyepiece, which is capable of seeing the entire EM spectrum, and even zoom in to view individual molecules while providing precise measurements of whatever's being viewed, so be really great as like a targeting sensor. They also have built-in nanotubes, which are used for injecting nanites into enemies for the purpose of starting the assimilation process. These are super short range, but can penetrate just about anything, and once inside the body or machine, the nanites can rapidly take control and start assimilating whatever they've been infecting. What they don't seem to have much, aside from in video games, is ranged weapons. Granted, most of the time we see them in shows or movies, their priority is to add to their own numbers, so shooting is just less productive than assimilating, but I think it's safe to assume that, should the need arise, Borg would be quite capable of outfitting drones with any number of weapons comparable to other Star Trek phasers and disruptors. Really though, assimilation is the ultimate Borg weapon. With it, even a single drone left to its own devices aboard an enemy ship is capable of systematically and rapidly converting that entire ship and its crew into Borg with no need for external support. As for the Cybermen, they too are superhumanly strong, and in addition they can deliver an electric shock by touching things, either to kill or incapacitate a victim for upgrading. They also have a variety of carried and integrated weaponry that they've displayed over the years, which basically amounts to laser guns, though really the only actual feat of strength we get to see from cyber weaponry, beyond killing unarmored humans, was a laser emitted from the headframe of a Cyberman that was capable of melting steel, and when upgraded by the laser screwdriver of the Master, could fully incinerate a fully evolved Cyberman.
So, there is that feat, but there are a few more pretty good feats for cyber weapons. It can be a little inconsistent because sometimes you see cyber weapons that really aren't doing any penetration on, like, surrounding objects at all. And then meanwhile, other times you see them melting through objects and stuff like steel, for example, or like metal bars and whatnot. So it can be a little consistent, it can be a little bit weird, but there are some high-end feats that we can take a look at.
You show courage. But you're a liar.
Cyber drones. They're targeting the defenses!
This is Captain Alice Berrin, Imperial ID 19 Delta 13B. Activate!
Cyberman, get down!
So glad I cloned here. Every detail paid off.
You left me alone for 10
Yeah, don't tell me I can't be angry!
All passengers, stand here! Marshals to your posts.
Who is it? Who's attacking us? After you.
Halt! Halt! Or you will be destroyed!
Okay, I also just want to come in during editing here just to say something and add to that. But I am not one to very often appeal to lower end feats when looking at stuff like, you know, Star Wars, Halo, Doctor Who, whatever. Because oftentimes, those lower end feats just don't make any realistic sense whatsoever. Like, you can't look me dead in the eyes and tell me that a cyber weapon not penetrating fabric, like on a tent or something, makes any lick of sense. Especially when, in the same scene, we just saw them blowing up mounted turrets. It's like, that does not add up. You also can't tell me that cyber weapons can only, like, crack glass visors.
Find something to hold on to. Number 2, don't get shot. I'm gonna deactivate the train's electromagnets. Well, how they get this stuff to the room?
When we've quite literally seen them blow up other Cybermen that have absorbed a lot of damage from energy weapons before. So, like, no, I'm sorry. I don't buy into a lot of those lower end feats. They just don't make sense to me. It makes far more realistic sense to look at the higher end feats, which is why I just don't tolerate trying to appeal to these lower end things. It's so weird and almost feels disingenuous to me.
Like the Borg, Cybermen bolster their numbers largely through capturing and converting their enemies, but unlike the Borg, Cybermen typically need special facilities to do so and can't start the process by simply infecting somebody with something.
Total takings for the day. 1 sandwich. Better than no sandwich, of course. Not as good as 2 sandwiches. Or even a chicken. That's a bit hot. That's not funny. Give me my hands back.
Since I was in my cradle. I'm not afraid of you!
No!
Hold it right there!
What's happening to them?
One more step and I fire!
Don't fire that! Her pulse will deactivate them.
Cybermen use human parts. I'm not human. You can't convert non-humans.
Well, that was true a long time ago, but we've upgraded ourselves. Current cyber units use almost any living components.
Incorporated, yes. Unfamiliar pulmonary setup, nervous system hyperconductive, remarkable brain processing speed.
That is until they started working with the Master, who set them up with airborne nanites that can convert anyone exposed to them into Cybermen, including dead people. Though this particular method had a few bugs to work out, such as the standard emotional inhibitors not necessarily working as intended, potentially leading to rebellion. They've also been known to create viruses that are targeted at anything from specific groups to all life in the universe. Cybermen are much more prone to being sneaky for long periods of time than the Borg are. Borg can be sneaky, like they were in First Contact, but they really only remained hidden for a few hours. Usually they show up in a giant ship and say, hey, we're assimilating you now. Subtlety be damned. Unlike the Cybermen, who can go days or even years in hiding before emerging to do something catastrophic.
I think this is a very, very serious strength for the Cybermen. They are very good at fighting non-conventional battles, and when I say non-conventional, that means, like, if they are on a back foot, they are very, very good at putting themselves back on the front foot. All they need to do is have a little bit of time to spare and a solid enough plan, and they can really do anything. They can infiltrate anybody. They can build whatever they want. They could be right underneath your nose and manage to make a plan work. We've seen them do this, I would say, almost every time we see them on the show. This is something, as he said himself, that I have not seen the Borg do very much. I haven't heard about them doing it very much. I think this would put them at a bit of a disadvantage. They seem to be a bit less creative than the Cybermen are, overall.
Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 4 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will cover the defensive capabilities of each faction. This is where things start getting really interesting, because both factions are known for being all but indestructible in their own universes. Starting with ships once again, this again is a very lopsided comparison, largely because of the total lack of information regarding the ships the Cybermen use, beyond the fact that they exist. Do they have shields, impenetrable armor? Are they absurdly quick and nimble? No idea.
I got on him about the ships earlier, but as far as I can tell, he's probably right about this. I have not been able to find anything through the research that I've done regarding shields on cyber ships, or like how durable they might be. I think it's safe to assume they'd be able to take a fair amount of hits, but overall, I don't think there's anything concrete that we have. If anybody, I know I have some Cyberman fans in my my server and in my comments, so if any of you guys know anything that I don't, feel free to share that with me. But for right now, I don't think we know anything about shield strength or overall hull durability.
The Borg, on the other hand, are simultaneously well documented, but also massively inconsistent. At the most basic level, Borg build massive ships that are capable of not only absorbing huge amounts of punishment, but also regenerate any non-catastrophic damage that they take over time, all on their own without needing any additional input. But in addition, they have crews of thousands of drones, which are capable of performing repairs and modifications as needed. This much is consistent throughout the shows. What isn't consistent is the Borg ship's ability to adapt to incoming damage. In the Best of Both Worlds 2-part episode of Next Generation, not only was the Borg cube able to absorb huge amounts of punishment by the Federation fleet at Wolf 359 due to intelligence obtained by assimilating Captain Picard, the ship was actually able to completely negate and ignore anything and everything the Federation was able to throw at it. And this points to the single biggest defensive advantage of the Borg. They are infinitely adaptable. If they're exposed to a given danger enough, they'll become completely immune to that danger automatically. This requires those fighting them to utilize rotating shield frequencies and weapon frequencies, or both their defensive and offensive tools become totally worthless very quickly. The reason I said earlier that Borg ship defenses are inconsistent, however, is because their ability to totally negate damage in ship battles seems to be isolated to the Best of Both Worlds story arc. In later encounters, such as in First Contact, we get to see plenty of damage being inflicted on a different cube, though it's unclear if this is just because they don't adapt in that way anymore for some reason, or if the Federation just managed to figure out a workaround. In any case, the one thing that the Borg are incapable of adapting to is overwhelming force. If they don't survive the first hit against them, they can't adapt. This was demonstrated several times throughout the shows, but most clearly in the Borg war against Species 8472, where the Borg were just getting thrashed because the 8472 ships just one-shot cubes.
So I don't want to, just lazily steal this guy's content here. I just thought I should play that to give people some context for what Borg cubes are generally capable of. But overall, I wanted to just quickly chime in and say, because he mentioned that Borg cubes have, thousands of Borg drones on board as the crew. When it comes to cyber ships and their crew sizes, I don't really know how many Cybermen it takes to pilot each, capital ship or carrier of theirs. But there is, I believe, one line in Ascension of the Cybermen that tells us how many Cybermen could be on board a cyber carrier. Does that mean it takes that many Cybermen to pilot the thing? No, of course not. I mean, a small group of humans, or 3 Cybermen, could have been capable of flying this cyber carrier around. But I think that this could at least give us some perspective on how many Cybermen could be on board a single cyber carrier.
Bringing soldiers to the front. Fresh Cybermen ready to fight. Warrior class.
There's got to be over 1,000 Cybermen in here.
I counted 10 doors on each level.
How many levels on this ship?
Several hundred.
And we're in the middle of stealing it.
On to the ground forces. For most of the history of the Cybermen, they've been incredibly resilient. At the most basic level, their brains controlling armored robotic bodies, so conventional small arms weapons have little effect on them.
Okay, see, I could be nice. I could be generous right now. I could just let this slide, but I'm a nerd, okay? I'm a geek, okay? I can't let this slide. Basically, the Cybus Industries Cybermen are the only Cybermen that were ever just brains in robot armor, okay? Every other variation of the Cybermen after that was like full-on corpses just covered by cybernetics and armor plating and stuff like that. The Mondasian Cybermen, the Tolosian Cybermen, all of them were corpses covered in cybernetics and enhanced shit, right? The Cybermen were originally, like, they had brains and robot bodies, but then eventually they strayed from that and went down more of a classic route where they just shoved bodies into cyber suits. So, I just had to come in and correct that. I'm sorry.
In the Legacy series in particular, they're stated to be immune to all weapons with the exception of gold, which would interfere with their circuitry or something if they just touched it.
So the gold weakness has always been very strange to me. It was never really all that well explained, in my opinion. But it used to be that gold particles and gold dust would clog their respiratory systems and basically suffocate them. Then it just kind of became where gold everything is their kryptonite, and they just die by like getting shot with golden arrows that shouldn't even be able to penetrate their metal armor, and gold bullets can kill them, and it just got really weird. And I think the writers kind of forgot why gold actually impacted them in the first place. But I mean, overall, yeah, they had the gold weakness a while back. But see, when it comes to the gold weakness, I think we all need to just agree to draw a line in the sand somewhere between the gold weakness making sense and it not making sense. The explanation for the gold weakness had always been that it was not just the gold itself, it was the particle guns that were firing gold particles and suffocating the Cybermen's respirators. That is what the explanation was for the gold weakness. And then the writers either didn't do their homework or just didn't care and started doing shit that made no sense. Golden tipped arrows. I don't care what your arrow is tipped with. These Cybermen in the same episode just shrugged off bullets while fighting neo-Nazis. Golden tipped arrows are not penetrating their armor and killing them. In Nightmare in Silver, the Doctor temporarily deactivates the Cyberplanner by slapping a fake plastic paper golden ticket on his face. That isn't how the weakness works. Stuff like that I am perfectly willing to just toss aside and not acknowledge because it doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. It isn't how the gold weakness was supposed to be. That is not the way it works. The writers, when doing stuff like that, were just being stupid.
The exception to this damage immunity was always overwhelming force. If you hit one with something like a rocket launcher, you'd be able to take it out, which was fine for individual Cybermen, but less useful against thousands of them. This was the case for most of Doctor Who. Then Nightmare in Silver came out and upped the ante pretty dramatically. In the far future era that it takes place in, Cybermen had learned a neat trick that allowed them to become immune to anything that damaged them in the past. In fact, in their war with humanity, this got to be such a huge problem that the standard solution to a Cyberman threat on a planet became nuke the planet. Give it up as lost and nuke the whole thing to stop even one Cyberman. In addition, this incarnation of Cybermen was also incredibly blindingly fast, and basically impossible to hit with anything when doing so. Another weakness of the Cybermen is the Cyber Controller, a super smart Cyberman who basically runs the show, and if destroyed, basically just shuts down all the regular Cybermen in the area.
Okay, for the life of me, I cannot find out where this man got this idea from, but this is just straight up false. This did not happen in Age of Steel. In Age of Steel, the Cybermen were shut down or killed by the code that shut down the inhibitor chip, Binary 9. They used that code and implanted it into Cybus's network, and shut down all the inhibitor chips and killed all the Cybermen. The Cyber Controller was still active though after that, so he didn't die and kill all the Cybermen. That's not what happened. In Attack of the Cybermen, the Cyber Controller was killed, but other Cybermen that were, a part of his program were still alive afterwards. His death did not cause the defeat of the Cyber Empire or whatever. In Tomb of the Cybermen, all the other Cybermen went back to sleep in their tombs. They were not killed because the Cyber Controller was killed. I cannot think of a single time that this has happened. What he said is just straight up not true, and I can't find any proof of it being true. If there is anything in external media, let me know, but I cannot find anything. I don't know where he got this from.
As for the Borg, the standard Borg drone is armored and shielded with the signature Borg ability to adapt. This requires anyone fighting them to utilize rotating frequencies on their phasers or disruptors in order to take down any drone, and when grouped, this means that the Borg will probably lose a few units at first, but then all their units will quickly become immune to all energy weapons. A couple limitations on Borg adaptation are, as usual, with the ships and in common with the Cybermen, overwhelming damage. If their ship is blown up, most, if not all, drones on board will be destroyed as well. They also have a weakness to physical weapons. If you have the cojones to try to take one on in a fist fight, or like Worf, to bring a sword to a fist fight, you can take out drones, and they apparently don't have the ability to adapt to such attacks particularly effectively, though they are also insanely strong, so if you get hit, you're pretty much done. Plus, up close and personal puts you in range of their nanotubes and potential assimilation, so buyer beware on the particular solution. As seen in First Contact, they also don't seem to have any particular resistance to holographic bullets, or presumably real bullets either. It's unclear if this is an actual limitation, or if the Borg simply hadn't encountered anybody who actually bothered to use physical bullets anymore. Presumably, if they were actually concerned about the threat that bullets pose, they just add extra armor to their drones. So I don't consider that particular shortcoming to be permanent.
So I haven't done too much research on this. I haven't read any Star Trek books, so don't quote me here. But like I did a few Google searches. I believe the Borg have been killed by bullets before in the Star Trek expanded media. Now I don't know how canon any of that stuff is, but it's worthy of taking note in my opinion. I agree though that they would probably just armor themselves more heavily as time goes on, so it's not particularly that big of a deal.
Another weakness of Borg drones is that they are cyborgs with exposed fleshy bits. So if you manage to do enough damage to those fleshy bits, you'll kill them, as Picard and Data do in First Contact again, by dumping a ton of warp plasma all over the Borg, which dissolved anything organic, killing off all the Borg in the area, including their queen.
I think this is very serious, and I feel like a lot of people don't take this into account. But biological warfare would be very bad for the Borg. The Cybermen could use stuff like this that dissolves organic matter. The Borg are covered in exposed fleshy bits. The Cybermen aren't. They're fully armored and covered from head to toe. The Borg have this weakness alone. The Cybermen don't. And I know some people might bring up the Cyberium and the death particle from The Timeless Child, but I think that's a very, very different example of destroying organic matter. That was a far more advanced and powerful bomb than something like warp plasma. Keep in mind, the Master and the Cybermasters weren't killed by the death particle. They survived after that event. The Cybermen could absolutely use a toned-down version of a death particle that would only attack exposed organic matter.
And there's another weakness of the Borg, that they have a single point of failure in their queen. If she goes down, the Borg are temporarily crippled, until they can establish a new queen. For a race of cybernetically enhanced, hive-minded beings, having a queen is really odd to me, but that's what the writers decided to go with, so whatever. Sci-fi in general really seems to like their single points of failure, don't they? Trade Federation battle droids, Borg, Cybermen, Locust aliens from Independence Day, Chitauri from Marvel, etc., etc. They all just, you kill that one thing and all of them just shut down. Whatever. It just means that each of these factions has a specific target to go for if you're ever fighting them, which is a pretty glaring weakness for both sides.
Yet again, this is not true. This is a glaring weakness for the Borg, not for the Cybermen. The Cybermen are better off with a controller, but they don't need a controller to survive and continue being tactically efficient. As soon as one controller or leader dies, they can instantly replace them. We see this demonstrated in the show.
You are proof.
Of what?
That emotions destroy you.
Yeah, I am. Mind you, I quite like hope. Hope's a good emotion. And here it comes.
Cyber Leader 1 has been terminated. Explain, download, shared files. I will be upgraded to Cyber Leader.
Defend this room. Chrissy, monitor communications. Kill one cyber leader and then just download into another.
Another weakness shared by both sides amounts to basically software exploits. In Best of Both Worlds, the Borg were defeated by implanting the command to sleep into their cube, which caused the whole thing to blow up for some reason. In Doctor Who, the Cybermen are rarely defeated via brute force methods. Usually the Doctor figures out some kind of or otherwise foils their plans, typically by defeating the cyber controller.
Yet again, this is not the case. Yes, in a few episodes, the Doctor defeats the cyber controller, but that is not ultimately the final checkmate that defeats the Cybermen. There are other elements in his plans that cause that final failure. In Tomb of the Cybermen just went back into hibernation. They did not all die because the cyber controller was defeated. In Age of Steel, they had Binary 9, the code that messed with the emotional inhibitor, and they used that because Cybus Industries just had that code for some reason. In Nightmare in Silver, the Doctor let the humans just blow up the planet because it got too out of hand. Remember, he beat the Cyber Planner, by the way, and the Cybermen didn't all die. Why didn't that happen? I think you are horribly misrepresenting the Cybermen here and what they are capable of or what their weaknesses might be.
Really, it's these defensive elements of both factions that made me want to do this comparison in the first place. Both factions are fundamentally similar, but their differences are what makes things really interesting. They have very similar weaknesses and strengths, and the parallels were just too close for me to not want to compare them. Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 5 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will cover the numerical element of each faction. Also, happy 2024, everyone. In this case, I'll talk about each faction not only in terms of what they have displayed on screen in terms of numbers available, but also in terms of how fast they can increase their numbers given a population to assimilate or upgrade. Starting with the Borg, the collective is absolutely massive. The region of space they control in the Delta Quadrant is even bigger than the entirety of the Dominion, which makes it bigger than all the Alpha Quadrant factions like the Federation, Klingons, Romulans, etc., bigger than all of them combined. Actual numbers on available drones or ships are unavailable, but as of Voyager, there are definitely at least tens of thousands of ships and trillions of drones, all serving the will of the collective. What happens to them all after Voyager is unclear. Star Trek Picard has done some stuff with Borg, but they're still a mysterious faction, so even if they said during that series or any other series that the Borg have been completely wiped out as of that series, I don't think I'd actually believe it. I would think that there is a remnant somewhere. As for how fast they can increase their numbers, assimilation is basically exponential. The initial stage of assimilation only requires a drone to inject a target with nanites, at which point the target will automatically become a drone and start sprouting cybernetics. Though the more extreme modifications like replacement eyes, limbs, etc., they require more attention and direct intervention. The nanites can't do that on their own. This all means that, if uncontested, drones can spread like wildfire through a population. And with their ability to adapt to threats, uncontested is how things like planetary assimilations typically go. The only way to stop the spread becomes kill off the potential victims, as the Borg cannot assimilate the dead. On to the Cybermen. So, quick hang up. Honestly, I have no idea how many Cybermen have ever actually existed simultaneously at height of their power in Doctor Who. We've seen episodes involving as few as a handful of Cybermen and as many as thousands of them at a time, but there is no galaxy map of their territory or anything like that to give an idea of just how many there really are out there. And any map like that would be useless anyway because Doctor Who does a lot of time jumping, so at any given point in time, who knows? So for the starting numbers bit, I honestly don't know, but for the sake of argument, I'll start them with a handful of ships with their Cybermen on board. Really though, whether they only have one ship at a time or 1,000, the starting numbers of their ship won't matter versus the Borg, who demonstrably have an absolutely absurdly large armada.
So he is right in one sense that we don't know how many units or ships the Cybermen would have had at a certain time, and it's a bit harder to make a number for that case because we're constantly jumping around their timeline in the show. But I do think that just using our brains and using the information that we have been given, it is very safe and very reasonable to assume that they have a lot of bodies in their army. The Cybermen went to war with the human empire. Not just the human empire, they've had beef with many other species as well during the events of the Cyber Wars and even beyond the Cyber Wars. But their main opponent was the human empire, because humanity was obviously their primary target for conversion. The human empire is said to be in control of 1,000 galaxies.
And being Emperor won't be as hard if you're by my side. And you'd rule 1,000 galaxies.
The Borg controls one singular quadrant of one singular galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. The human empire controls 1,000 galaxies, about 1,000 galaxies if you want to try and lowball or be generous. But even 10 galaxies, even being in control of 10 galaxies is quite the feat of territory. That's certainly more than the Borg would have. The Cybermen are an intergalactic threat, and they would either need supreme technology or relative numbers to be able to combat a faction as big as the human empire in Doctor Who. Now, considering the fact that this is a universe with constant access to time travel, reality hopping, and weapons that are capable of destroying galaxies, again, keep in mind, they had to destroy, the human empire had to destroy an entire galaxy, the Tiberian Spiral Galaxy, which was home to 1 billion trillion people.
It's hard to fight an enemy that uses your armies as spare parts.
You beat them, though. Beat them or you wouldn't be here. How?
Look up there. That corner of sky, what do you see?
Nothing. It's just black. No stars, no nothing.
Well, it used to be the Tiberian Spiral Galaxy. 1 million star systems, 100 million worlds, 1 billion trillion people. It's not there anymore. No more Tiberian Galaxy. No more Cybermen. It was effective.
In the hopes that it would stop the Cybermen. And it didn't work! Destroying the Tiberian Spiral Galaxy didn't work in killing the Cybermen. They still survived. They still had more left over after that. So I think it is very reasonable to assume that either the Cybermen would have far superior technology and firepower compared to the Borg, or they would just drown the Borg in numbers. If anybody is going to tell me that the Cybermen can fight a intergalactic war across time and space against the human empire, plus other races that got involved in the beef too, for thousands upon thousands of years, with like maybe what? Billions of Cybermen? No, I'm sorry. No, that's not reasonable. That's ridiculous. The Cybermen absolutely, most likely, have a lot of bodies at their disposal, or had, like if we're taking them at the height of their power or whatever, right? I also want to just go on a quick tangent about something that Fiction Rant did that really irks me and kind of annoys me. So after admitting that we don't know exactly how many Cybermen there are or how many ships they would have, he then goes on to basically give them his own estimated number, his own custom number for this scenario. And according to him, that is basically a handful of ships with, some Cybermen on board. And then he still goes on to say that the Borg would just have far superior numbers, so it doesn't matter. How do you know that? You just said that we don't know how many Cybermen there are. Sure. Do we always see like 1 million Cybermen on screen every single time they're here? No. I mean, we do see a lot of Cybermen on screen rather often. We've seen millions before. But just because we don't always see everything on screen, that doesn't mean the Cybermen don't have that. The truth is, we don't see a lot of the Cyber Wars at their height on screen. We often do not see the Cybermen at the height of their power on screen. That is stuff that is usually implied or given to us through vague lore dumps or comics, whatever, right? At the end of the day, I think it is disingenuous and rather unfair, unnecessarily unfair, to still give the Cybermen less than the Borg when we don't know whether or not they would have that, according to you. That's just you propping up the Borg now. If you wanted to be fair about this matchup and make it actually worth talking about and worth conversing about, then you would just give them relative numbers. You would give them relatively even numbers, so it doesn't matter. It isn't really a part of the conversation, because according to your beliefs, again, one side is just so unclear, so unspecified, we don't know, we can't be sure. So the only real, fair, reasonable thing to do here is just make both sides even, but you didn't do that. Instead, you still said that the Borg have more when we don't know that. This is the same thing that Roland review guy did, and it really annoys me.
As for how fast they can increase their numbers, here's where things get a little interesting. Traditionally, Cybermen could only increase their numbers by capturing people, taking them to a facility, cutting them up, putting their brains into new cyber bodies. This can be done within a few minutes per person, but it has a substantial infrastructure requirement before the process can be done at scale. That's the typical way. Then the Master got involved and gave them a bit of an adjustment. In Death in Heaven, the Master, or Missy at the time, created cyberpollen, basically airborne nanites, which, when in contact with people living or dead, can quickly convert them into Cybermen. There's a bit of a software bug with this method, however, as it sometimes failed to suppress the emotions of the new Cybermen, so they were a little unruly. This is what happened in the case of Danny Pink. Okay, quick mini rant here about Danny Pink and Clara for all you Doctor Who fans out there. I'll admit right now that I don't even watch the show anymore.
So I'm going to skip over the rest of this Danny Pink rant because it's not really important or necessary at all for the rest of this video. But I think this part is kind of important because, I mean, you know, he said right there that he just doesn't really watch the show anymore. And I mean, I don't really fault him for that because the show has gone super downhill at this point. It's not good. You're not really, you know, missing out on anything here. But if you're going to talk about something like this, then you need to do your research. You need to actually understand the new things that have come out, the new stuff that you should talk about, right? Cyber conversion planets, cyber warriors, cyber carriers, the fact that it is now stated in the show later on that they have warp technology, FTL tech, and other stuff too that I will mention later on in a later point of his. But overall, I don't like a lot of things, right? I don't like a lot of new Doctor Who, but I still have to research some of it. I still have to look at some of it if I want to properly and fairly talk about these things.
Mini rant over. For the sake of comparison, I'm going to do a more anything goes approach. So I'm going to allow Cybermen to propagate via cyberpollen, which I know is a huge concession in their favor, considering that's the first and last time we ever get to see them do this in the series, but I think it'll make the matchup more interesting, so I'm going to allow it. The alternative, slower upgrade process still works, but this way I get to include zombie Cybermen, and that's just plain fun.
Okay, so I guess that's fair. I would personally never incorporate this cyberpollen stuff because, like he said, it was a one and done thing. Only ever seen in one episode, only ever accomplished with the help of Missy the Master. So either, you know, they lost access to that technology after the Master left, or they were just never able to properly fine-tune it and make it work right because of the emotional inhibitor problems. So, I mean, fine, I guess, you know, he can do whatever he wants at the end of the day, it's his video, but I usually would never really include that. So for this next part, he's going to be reiterating a lot of what he's already said, so I'm going to do a lot of skipping around just to try and get to the important stuff and maybe give you guys some context based on what he said about certain things that he might not have mentioned before. So
something fundamental to the Borg, which is both their greatest strength and one of their biggest weaknesses, is that they are adaptive but not innovative. What this means is that when they encounter a new technology, they can adapt and integrate the new tech at a insane rate, but if they can't assimilate something, they can't figure out how to do it on their own, and they can't work out alternative solutions to problems. They have to assimilate it, then they learn. They don't invent anything. This was a big problem for them in Voyager when the Borg were being systematically destroyed by species 8472, which they could not assimilate, so they couldn't come up with any countermeasures to defeat the aliens until they struck a deal with Captain Janeway, who broke the Prime Directive again, to save the collective from this threat in exchange for safe passage across their space, which, as it turns out, species 8472 was actually the victims in this particular conflict. The Borg had fired the first shot, so it's perfectly reasonable for 8472 to be blowing up the Borg whenever they saw them. Yet, when Janeway got home with Voyager, she really should have been thrown in jail after the welcoming ceremony for all the stuff that she did during the series. She broke a lot of rules. Anywho.
So I haven't found a lot of information on how good the Cybermen are at understanding foreign technology, but I would go out on a limb and say they're fairly decent at it. They could be fairly good at it. In The Next Doctor, they stole technology from the Daleks, and these were the primitive Cybermen, by the way, not the, OG Mondasian boys or Telosian boys, whatever. They stole and understood technology that the Daleks had used. They didn't need to, quote-unquote, assimilate it just to understand how it works. So I'd say this is probably something that, again, the Cybermen have over the Borg. And actually, now that I think about it, in Doomsday, the Cybermen, when trying to ally themselves with the Daleks, they just straight up said that their technologies are compatible. I would assume that they found this out through scanning of some kind. But how would you know that your technology is compatible with somebody else's if you don't have, some kind of understanding of it?
Other technologies and abilities that the Borg have demonstrated include the Collective, which networks all Borg together so that what any one of them learns, all of them learn. They've also demonstrated the ability to travel through time, though they're apparently pretty reluctant to do so that often for some reason. Finally, they can travel at incredible speed across the galaxy using transwarp, which requires a network of pre-existing corridors, but once they have those, they can move about really, really fast. As for the Cybermen, as I've said in previous sections, documentation is really, really poor in Doctor Who. But since I'm taking a anything goes approach to this comparison, I'll talk about some of the things that they've been shown to do. First, they can upgrade the dead to make more Cybermen using cyberpollen. They can also adapt to incoming threats in very much the same way as the Borg do, though they have the advantage of being extremely hard to kill or destroy as a baseline, so whereas the Borg will lose several drones to a particular weapon before adapting and becoming immune, a single Cyberman can be pelted with attacks and then adapt mid-fight and suddenly be immune to further attacks. This adaptation is so potent, in fact, that it was stated in the episode Nightmare in Silver, where we see this ability for the first and last time, that the Empire of Mankind's response to the discovery of a single Cyberman on a planet was basically just blow up the planet to keep it from making more Cybermen and spreading. One of the more consistent elements of Cybermen is that they're basically indestructible to all but the most extreme measures. That is, small arms fire won't hurt them. But nuking their ship will kill all of the Cybermen on board. The exception to this has been gold, which basically just fries their circuits and kills them very easily. But it's a hard weakness to use because gold is relatively uncommon.
Gold bullets, 10x! You think unit wouldn't be ready? Why isn't it working?
We long ago developed resistance to gold.
Can we stop talking about the gold now? Can we all just agree as a collective human race to just stop talking about the gold now, unless we are specifically talking about older variations of the Cybermen that are not immune to it? That would be nice. See, this is why I brought up earlier, even if you don't watch the show currently, if you're going to make videos like this, you need to do some research. You need to look for this stuff, because there is valuable information even in the stuff that you don't really like.
Cybermen also have access to time travel technology, and unlike the Borg, they are quite willing to use it to their advantage all the time. Though it's stated that their ability to time travel is very crude, whatever that means. In fact, one of the things I was able to dig up is the statement that if the Cybermen ever managed to refine their time travel to not be so crude, they'd rival the Daleks. Which, considering the Daleks, if you know anything about Doctor Who, the Daleks are the biggest bad guys, recurring villains that show up in the series. They're capable of building super weapons that will destroy everything non-Dalek in every universe simultaneously. So if the Cybermen can contend with that, given an improved single technology, they're pretty scary.
I'm pretty sure we see this in full display in the Supremacy of the Cybermen comic story, which I have ordered and I'm going to read very soon. I'm very excited about that. And if I don't finish this video before I read it, then I might include some extra information I get from there if it's related at all. But in that comic story, the Cybermen basically all but destroy Sontar and the Sontaran Empire. They erase the Daleks from existence. They do a lot of crazy shit. They mess with the timelines a lot. So the Cybermen with full unlimited time travel capabilities are a big deal. Yeah.
A common element shared by both Cybermen and Borg is that they're pretty much slaves to logic, which helps them be very efficient, but especially for the Cybermen, this often becomes their downfall as the Doctor inserts some chaos into their ordered logical world, and they basically just don't understand and freak out. Cybermen have also been shown to use what Doctor Who calls a transmat, which is basically a Star Trek transporter. Transmat capabilities vary from basically point-to-point transport, just like Star Trek transporters, to operating at interplanetary distances. So, for the sake of this comparison, I'm going to have to assume that the transmat can be used by the Cybermen to jump Cybermen from planet to planet without the need for a ship. An important difference I found between the Cybermen and Borg is that Cybermen are actually capable of innovation. I don't think they can adapt as quickly or effectively as the Borg. Like, they don't just inject nanites into something and suddenly they know how to do it. But they can actually invent things without having to steal it from somebody first. Aside from all that, Cybermen are pretty basic as far as sci-fi factions go. Basically, they're brains in robot suits that are really, really hard to kill. The rest is basically gravy. Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 7 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will cover the tactics used by each faction. Starting with the Borg, they're all about efficiency. This is why both the big times of the Borg were attempting to assimilate Earth, they only sent one cube to do the job, because generally that's all they need. And often, even that much is overkill. In the Best of Both Worlds story arc and in First Contact, the cube in question almost made it to Earth and was only stopped by insider knowledge courtesy of Captain Picard, which the Borg just didn't plan for. Basically, Borg have really simple tactics. That is, overwhelm with force, assimilate to cover any weaknesses, and most of the time those two combined equal victory. The problem arises because of their rigid adherence to efficiency. For example, multiple times now, Federation personnel have been able to beam aboard Borg vessels and just wander around unmolested until they took aggressive action, at which point they'd be quickly overwhelmed by drones and have to retreat. This is silly. At the very least, the Borg have to realize that allowing enemies to wander around their ships is an attempt to gain a strategic advantage, which wouldn't take much effort at all to oppose and defeat. At worst, those apparently harmless intruders may be doing something that could significantly damage or even destroy the Borg, so why let them get that far in the first place? In First Contact, why let Picard at the end get into engineering, where there's a ton of dangerous stuff lying around? By himself and unarmed. Sure, the Queen may want to mess with him or something, but she could do all the gloating she wanted after having any one of her drones inject him with nanites first, and then his plans would be royally screwed up from the beginning. There's no telling if Data could have saved the day anyway, but for Picard's whole side of things, why take the risk? The Borg Queen is another baffling addition to the Borg. Why have a single point of failure like that? Being a collective means that any damage you inflict upon the Borg is inherently a drop in the ocean of power that they have, since you'd have to kill off a staggering number of drones and ships in order to even make a dent in their overall power. Sure, destroying a cube that's trying to assimilate Earth is a big deal for humanity, but for the Borg it was just a minor setback. For them it was Tuesday. They'll get around to sending another cube when they feel like it, it's just not that big of a deal for them. Then a Queen gets involved, and suddenly there's a singular target to focus upon. And if you can hit that target, as Future Janeway does in the Voyager finale, the whole collective gets messed up for a while until they can make a new Queen. There's absolutely no reason for them to have a Queen at all. All it does is introduce weakness. On to the Cybermen. If I had to summarize Cybermen tactics in one word, it would be patience. Time and time again, the Cybermen have demonstrated an ability to lie low for even years at a time, or in the case of the Legacy series, hundreds of years at a time in their tombs, grabbing people who won't be missed here and there to bolster their numbers until they're ready to emerge and strike a crippling blow all at once. This seems to be true in every incarnation of the Cybermen, including the New Who Age of Steel episode, which introduced them into the New Who series, where an alternate Earth gets upgraded in a matter of days by the newly invented Cybermen through the utilization of basically what amounts to mind-controlling everyone with smartphones. This initial strike was so effective that the Doctor and Rose end up having to leave without saving the day, in a rare total defeat for the Doctor. Granted, it was an alternate Earth, so regular Earth is fine, but it was this chilling vision of, if the Cybermen come to Earth, here's how quick it could just completely take over.
So this isn't really accurate. I mean, it's not really that important to correct, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like talking about it. This isn't really an accurate description of what happened in the episode. The entire world was not converted. The only factory that was active was the one in Britain, which was destroyed, and the whole operation was stopped by the Doctor. Now, were there more Cybus factories active and waiting to be turned on, and the flip switched? The switch flipped. Yeah. So the Doctor technically didn't defeat the Cybermen as a whole on that parallel Earth, but it wasn't a complete and total defeat. He, at the end of the day, won. He defeated the Cybermen. He defeated John Lumick, the Cyber Controller. He stopped their operation in Great Britain, and then he left the Preachers to go continue doing his work for him, destroying other factories around the world.
For ground combat, though, when the fighting is actually started, Cybermen have sort of a no-holds-barred approach to warfare. They're really hard to kill, so they're generally happy to just march in guns blazing most of the time, but they've also been known to utilize specially designed viruses to kill or incapacitate their enemies, and I've already mentioned the cyber pollen, being able to assimilate the dead and all that in previous episodes. As with the Borg, the Cybermen also have a single point of failure in the Cyber Controller, though this is less of a tacked-on feature, like the Queen feels like, and more of a ground-up design flaw. Basically, each Cyberman itself isn't extraordinarily smart or anything like that, since their robotic bodies are just their bodies. Their brains are still whoever was there before, except with emotional inhibitors and stuff. So it's the Cyber Controller for any particular group that does the actual planning and calling the shots and all that kind of stuff. All that said, the destruction of the Cyber Controller is bad for any particular Cyberman group, but each unit is independent enough to be able to bounce back given enough time, and if a group of normal Cybermen doesn't have a controller, they will specifically seek out somebody with extraordinarily intelligence so they can upgrade them and make them into a new controller. Basically, they're at their best when they have a controller, they don't need one.
Okay, so you're kind of contradicting yourself here. You're saying that the Cyber Controller is a single point of failure, like the Borg Queen is, but then you also say that it is useful to have a Cyber Controller, but the Cybermen don't need a Cyber Controller to operate. So it is not a single point of failure. You're wrong. And now I'm starting to see why he's doing these videos in separate parts, because I'm assuming somebody in a previous comment section corrected his point about, oh, kill the Cyber Controller and then all the Cybermen die, because that's obviously not true. We've never seen that happen before. So I guess somebody must have commented and corrected his point, and now he's saying otherwise. But he's still trying to call it a singular point of failure, but you just, again, contradicted yourself here. And no, I would say the Cybermen are fully capable of being tactically sound and efficient without a controller present. I mean, well, first off, like I said, if they are in need of a cyber leader, if they are in need of any kind of leadership, they can just immediately upgrade one of their own units and just turn them into a brand new cyber leader. But we've seen many times in quite a few episodes, Cybermen acting independently without leadership present where they're at right now. Like Closing Time, the moon base, the 10th planet, the first time we ever seen them. They don't need direct leadership, a cyber leader, a cyber controller, a cyber planner, to be efficient.
As for how smart these controllers are, in Nightmare in Silver, the cyber planner, Mr. Clever, was able to mostly keep pace with the Doctor, who is basically the most intelligent character in the entire series, so I think it's safe to say that they're pretty dang smart, if somewhat overconfident at times. Come to think of it, it's actually odd to me because the Cybermen are this enemy that is as old as the Doctor Who series, and they're always scary, but rarely are they actually a formidable force in the universe. Even in Nightmare in Silver, when we get to see the super powerful combat Cybermen in action, the threat that they pose is considered to be a relic of the past rather than a clear and present danger until the characters are actually forced to face them directly.
I, of course, wish that we would see more about the Cyber Wars and we would see more about the Cybermen in the peak of their power. I wish that we had more information about stuff like this. I wish that it was a lot, more easily accessible. And I wish that we didn't have to go scouring through, old episodes and new episodes trying to find evidence for stuff. That's all right there in front of us. But, I don't know. That's just the world we live in, I guess. The Cyber Wars, at the end of the day, aren't like a very big, important conflict in Doctor Who history. The Time War got a lot of focus because it was just so important to Gallifrey and the Time Lords and the Doctor as a character. The Cyber Wars don't really offer that, so there's not a lot of need to focus on them and how capable the Cybermen are in conflict. A lot of the stories told in Doctor Who are just a lot smaller scale, so we don't see like big battles like Star Wars, Geonosis or whatever, right? Like we're not seeing that kind of stuff because that's just not the kind of show Doctor Who really is.
Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 8 of my series discussing the Borg vs. Cybermen contest. This part will cover my final conclusions on this matchup. To quickly recap from the intro section, there's multiple scenarios I'll be comparing for this matchup. Those are ship versus ship, fleet versus fleet, soldiers versus soldier, army versus army, and who wins in a galactic domination race. Unfortunately for this particular comparison, I wasn't really able to dig up any useful information on cyber ships. Their numbers, capabilities, nothing. So the first two scenarios I'm going to be calling no contest since, while the Borg are fairly well documented, I really have nothing to compare them to for space combat. Sorry everyone, the space matchup is boring this time. What's much more interesting is the ground matchup, especially because there's real information to be gleaned about both sides. Starting with the 1v1 Borg drone versus Cyberman, I think this is actually a pretty straightforward matchup. I think the Cyberman wins pretty much every time. This is largely because this is a first-time encounter, so neither side is adapted to the other, and neither knows what to expect. So whereas the Borg drone comes with all sorts of downsides, like not typically being equipped with weapons unless the situation specifically requires it, their adaptation not really working at all for the first few drones in a fight, and the fact that their nanites require not only physical contact, but also that the drone overpower their enemy. Meanwhile, the Cybermen are all but indestructible, have the same level or greater physical strength than Borg drones, have integrated weaponry, both a taser kind of weapon and laser guns, and this isn't even including the super Cybermen we see in Nightmare in Silver. This is just your standard run-of-the-mill Cyberman that has all of these things standard. So yeah, 1v1, I'd give this matchup to the Cyberman pretty much every time. Army versus army is where things start to get weird, and I think it all comes down to who can adapt to what. For starters, the Borg can absolutely adapt to cyber guns and tasers very quickly, rendering them immune to those attacks. What they don't seem to be able to adapt to is being physically overpowered, either through the use of bladed weapons or by having people like Data, who are just plain crazy strong, break their necks and tear out cables and such. I think the Cybermen are strong enough to do that. So I see the battle very quickly going from a firefight to a brawling match, at least on the Cybermen side. I'll assume that in the event of an army battle, the Borg would actually bother arming their drones, so whatever the handheld version of a cutting beam is, I don't recall ever seeing them on screen, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. The Borg don't really use phasers or disruptors, so the question becomes, would Borg drone weaponry actually be effective against the Cybermen? I'm actually going to say no, it wouldn't. You have to understand, especially if you're a fan of New Who and haven't watched a lot of the older stuff, the Cybermen that you see in New Who are typically really primitive. The Super Cyberman from Nightmare in Silver is the major exception to that. The more primitive Cybermen could be taken down by just concentrated fire or overwhelming force. They were pretty bullet resistant, but beyond that, they weren't indestructible by any means. Typically, though, one of the defining characteristics of Cybermen is that they are basically impervious to damage with the exception of gold, which basically just fries their systems. Keep in mind, this is against really advanced factions that show up throughout the Doctor Who universe. They're all spacefaring, they all have sophisticated weaponry, and yet the Cybermen are immune to all of their weapons except for gold. And this is a problem in this particular kind of matchup because the Borg don't really just carry around gold. So the Borg wouldn't win a fistfight against the Cybermen, and their weapons wouldn't be terribly effective either.
Okay, so surprisingly enough, I kind of disagree. I might be playing a little bit of defense for the Borg now, actually. There are, of course, examples seen in the show of Cybermen being resistant to energy weapons. only thing is, at the same exact time, there are examples of Cybermen being killed by energy weapons.
Exterminate!
Oftentimes, though, I think you could try and argue that the weapons that kill the Cybermen are, like, just strong enough and powerful enough to do so in 1 or 2 shots, because oftentimes, as we've seen with the 80s Cybermen in the clips that I just showed earlier, they can be killed by their own weapons fairly easily, but other weapons didn't really have an effect on them. Meanwhile, Daleks, they are obvious, they're Daleks, right? So, I don't know. It's a little weird. There are still some loopholes that you could find, arguments you can make, but overall, I think the Borg could possibly be fine.
So what about nanites? What about assimilation? Here's where I think the Borg may be able to level the playing field or even take the fight entirely. The nanotubes that Borg use to inject their nanites are supposed to be able to pierce basically anything, so I have no problem assuming that they could inject nanites into Cybermen. Once injected into your typical Cyberman, I think the nanites would have a field day changing the largely robot body into a friendly. I don't think that much of the regular assimilation process would even be necessary when capturing Cybermen, since most of that process involves replacing body parts with cybernetics. The Cybermen are basically all robot except for their brains, so the nanites would be more than enough to convert them over to being new drones. One exception, though. The Super Cybermen that I keep referencing, they have the ability to adapt and become immune to any attack within seconds, and I'm going to assume that that includes an attack from an infestation of microscopic machines. I think that the Super Cyberman would basically be the ultimate anti-Borg weapon because I don't think they can be assimilated. The Borg simply can't beat them.
I know people tend to not take this into account, but in the Doctor Who Star Trek crossover comic, the Borg couldn't assimilate the Cybermen at all. And those were the Cybus variants. Those weren't the more advanced variants like we're seeing here with the Warrior class or even the Legion Cybermen, or the War class Cybermen. Like, those were Cybus variants. Those were a lot weaker, and the Borg couldn't assimilate them. Obviously, I know some people take that as non-canon, not worth it, don't look into it, don't worry about it. But, I mean, I just want to point it out.
You get to see this really clearly during the conflict with Species 8472, where the Borg were getting wrecked because they simply couldn't assimilate any of the aliens with their hyper-aggressive immune systems. So what does this mean for the Army versus Army matchup? I think that depends. In a standard matchup of standard drones versus standard Cybermen, I think all the drones will be wiped out, but they'll be able to assimilate enough of the Cybermen that even if the Cybermen managed to destroy all the infected, there just wouldn't be that many left by the time the fighting was done. So I think that the Borg would win more than they would lose, but it would be a bit of a toss-up, honestly. If, however, there are any number of Super Cybermen involved, the fight becomes really lopsided instantly. They'd be impossible to assimilate, immune to all the damage the Borg could inflict, and would be able to move at blinding speed that the Borg simply couldn't deal with. If supers are involved, the Cybermen win every time. As for galactic conquest, all the same factors persist, but we're stretching the time frame pretty dramatically. Both factions would be able to spread like wildfire through their starting regions, though I think the Borg would spread faster since assimilation can be conducted at a large scale with very little infrastructure requirements, whereas the Cybermen need large facilities and lots of resources to do the same.
So this is technically incorrect because you gave the Cybermen access to dark water. By the way, correction, I can't believe I missed this. The episode is literally called Dark Water. They aren't airborne nanites that they use to resurrect the dead. It's water. Like, it was a big rain cloud that they just, rained over a cemetery, and they brought back the dead. But whatever. It's still very effective. But point is, they don't need a large infrastructure and big facilities to do that. I mean, like, obviously normal conversions, sure, but you gave them access to this technology for this matchup, so...
That said, the Cybermen transmat would allow them to jump from planet to planet in the blink of an eye without the need for ships, so they'd be able to focus their resources on spreading rather than shipbuilding. I still think that the Borg would spread faster, but the transportation advantage for the Cybermen would... It matters. When the two sides encounter each other, I think that the first few encounters would go very badly for the Borg, but they'd gather some very important information about their enemies, mainly the weakness to gold, and that Super Cybermen are not to be messed with. Once they had that information, the fighting would turn against the Cybermen badly. The Borg would be able to get a hold of all the gold they could ever need by just mining asteroids and such, and use it to fight and destroy standard Cybermen with no problem.
Okay, so again, it doesn't even really matter because they aren't weak to gold anymore. That has been established already. But I have a big question, too. How exactly will the Borg find out that the Cybermen even have that weakness? Because, again, at least the way it was supposed to be when it was originally introduced was that it was gold particles that suffocated the Cybermen. So, technically, it wouldn't have even been gold specifically. It's just these kinds of, like it's just like similar metals, stuff like that. It's not even really the gold by itself that they're weak to. It's mostly just the particle guns, the glitter guns. So like that is a rather specific weakness. How exactly are the Borg going to realize, oh, hey, if we suffocate them with golden particles, then they die? I mean, like, again, it's not even really worth talking about, though, because it's not a weakness anymore. This has been established now. So if he mentions it again, I'm just going to ignore it, really. But
as for dealing with supers, well, the Empire of Man, or whatever they're called in the Nightmare in Silver episode, already proposed the solution to that problem. Just blow up the planet they're on. Borg would absolutely be capable and willing to take this kind of drastic action against this kind of enemy. In addition, Borg would be absolutely capable of capturing supers using transporters and either keeping one for long-term study and finally being able to learn how to adapt to it, or just transporting them directly into stars or something. They could do that. Regardless of how the conflict was conducted, I think that the Borg would ultimately win, though they'd have a hell of a time actually exterminating all the Cybermen since they're like roaches, and a remnant always seems to survive.
I think this is really funny because we're just kind of assuming that the Borg would be totally down to blow up every single planet that the Cybermen or have war-class Cybermen on. I mean, there are a lot of Cybermen, as we've established. There are very likely a lot of Cybermen. There are also very likely a lot of war-class Cybermen in those ranks too. Are they really just going to have to blow up every single world that they find those things on? That is going to be a lot of planets being blown up. Are they really capable of doing that on such a large scale? And are they really willing to do that on such a large scale? Their ultimate goal is to assimilate technology. They would be destroying a lot of potential technology for assimilation if they just blew up multiple worlds with civilizations on them. By the way, the Cybermen have quite commonly made use of planet-destroying technology, or at least extinction-level event-causing technology as well.
What are you doing?
Transmitting. My ship will lock onto my signal. It will tear this reality, but this planet will remain only in shreds.
This world doesn't end in 1816. It can't.
It will.
How much damage could this bomb do?
Enough.
Enough for what?
To make life intolerable for the few who survived.
I think drastic action is called for.
There can't be much time left. What can we do?
Abandon methodical procedure for blind instinct. Laser cutter. Laser.
Full power. We proceed towards the destruction of Earth. It is a word like any other. And so is destruction, which is what we are going to do to that planet.
You've tried before.
This time we shall succeed.
We no longer need you. The Cyber Megatron bomb will be delivered. We must destroy life on Earth completely.
Cyber bombs. The most compact and powerful explosive devices ever invented.
Yes. And their use was banned by the Armageddon Convention.
Cybermen do not subscribe to any theory of morality in war, Doctor. Our calculations indicate that 2 bombs placed in the central fissure of Volga will fragmentize the planet.
If time travel gets involved in any significant way, I think the Borg still wins the galactic conflict because they'll get a hold of the tech sooner or later and just be able to abuse it the same way the Cybermen do. I don't think that that'll stay a unique advantage for very long at all.
This is, I think, the weirdest part of his videos, because so his argument against the time travel thing is that the Borg would get a hold of that technology sometime in the future and then be able to level the playing field. How are they going to level the playing field when the Cybermen have already gone back in time and like just destroyed them before they even get started? You know, how are they going to get the technology later, and then I like that doesn't make sense. That isn't really how time travel would be working here. The Cybermen would have erased them from existence if they felt the need to already. The only argument that you could make in regards to time travel is that the Cybermen would just be so powerful and like not see the Borg as a very big issue. Meanwhile, the Borg would be more desperate, so then they would be more likely to use time travel first. That is the only argument that you could make. It's the only one that I've heard that seems compelling enough. But take time travel out of the equation, I don't think this is a very close war.
So there you go. My conclusions on how the matchup between the Borg and the Cybermen would go. Honestly, I'm surprised at my own conclusions, but I'm having a hard time coming up with any other conclusion given the research I've done.
Okay, so that's it. We're finally done watching his stuff. So I'll just give my final verdict, then we can call it a day, because this video is long enough, I think. But I hard disagree. I very hard disagree here. The Cybermen, as far as I'm aware, have far better strategies. They have far better tactics as well. The Borg are very direct. They're very simplistic with how they do things. The Cybermen are much more sneaky. They are very good at, crafting these large-scale plans that have multiple phases, right? They're very good at hiding right under your nose. They're very good at what they do. They're very good at adapting to enemy technology. They're very good at adapting to enemy strategies. And the Borg are too. They can be good at adapting to enemy technology as well, but that's not a strength that is unique to them, of course. Individual Cybermen are better, possibly physically stronger. I haven't seen a whole lot of uber compelling Borg physical feats, although they are obviously like superhumanly strong. But on an individual level, overall, Cybermen would be better, in my opinion. The war-class Cybermen are a major advantage. There are also other things that Fiction Rant here did not mention or really cover, like, for example, the Cyberium. That's an interesting thing to talk about. Then you have Cyber Kings, which we've seen in both the show and in comics. 3 Cyber Kings alone in the Supremacy of the Cybermen story arc were able to spearhead an invasion of Sontar, so they are pretty formidable when they are at the best of their potential. And the one that we saw in the show was a very primitive version, so I don't think it's really fair to try and use that one in arguments because it was made with Victorian London, era technology. The Cybermen are also capable of converting entire planets, and we've seen this in the show in the form of cyber conversion planets. They do take a lot of energy to power, but it's a thing that the Cybermen can do and have done. Those planets can also, like fire a beam, like a Death Star laser, that converts other planets into just pure metal and like foundries and factories, and it's all really cool stuff. So the Cybermen have some really cool toys that they can use. The Borg, as far as I've seen, it's really just the Borg drones and the Borg cubes and yada yada yada. It's really not that much. Cybermen have better strategies. They likely have better numbers. They have better individual units. They have, I would say, smarter individual units as well. I mean, as Fiction Rant himself mentioned, the Borg are very silly. They're very slow to react to clearly hostile opponents. I think stuff like that is a major downside to them. The Borg adaptation can be overcome slightly by, what did he say, using different frequencies on weapons and stuff, cycling through different settings and power levels and whatnot. The Cybermen could probably find something like that, a similar loophole in their own technology, their own weapons. The Borg have a weakness in the Borg Queen, where if you kill the Borg Queen, then all the Borg in the surrounding area just die. The Cybermen do not have a weakness like that because, as we have talked about already, cyber controllers, cyber leaders, cyber planners, all of them can be replaced fairly quickly, and the Cybermen don't really rely on them. The Cybermen have also made use of biological warfare in the past, and the Borg could be very, very, very susceptible to that, as we see in First Contact, where all of their exposed organics can be just dissolved by that plasma gas, whatever the hell it was in First Contact. If the Borg's exposed organics are vulnerable to stuff like that, the Cybermen could very easily find similar ways of destroying the Borg. Obviously, the Borg could try and upgrade and adapt, but it would still be a weakness worth talking about, in my opinion. I'd also be curious to know if the Borg adaptation shields could be shut down by any outside force. Like, if the Cybermen could develop some technology, or some kind of bomb, I don't know, electromagnetic ion, whatever, that could shut down the Borg adaptation shields, that would basically render them, like, totally defenseless. We also already talked about how I think it's very much reasonable to assume that the Cybermen would have far superior numbers compared to the likely trillions of Borg drones. Overall, it's just, I don't see the Borg winning. The only way they could possibly win, in my opinion, is through some time travel shenanigan bullshit. But that's it. That's the only scenario where they could have a chance. The Borg just have so many exploitable weaknesses. The Borg are less creative and intelligent when it comes to strategizing compared to the Cybermen. The Cybermen on an individual level too are usually just better than like individual Borg drones. Cybermen likely have better numbers. The Cybermen have very powerful weapons and technology of their own. The Borg just have so many exploitable weaknesses that the Cybermen could take advantage of. Meanwhile, the Cybermen don't have nearly as many weaknesses as the Borg do. I just think this is a very lopsided fight, and I think videos like this very horribly misrepresent the Cybermen. I think they are very misinformed, and I mean, overall, I just don't see it. I don't see how, when you take the Cybermen at, like, you know, a high point in their time, I don't see how you can look at them and think, yeah, the Borg have a chance. Because when you actually take the time to do the thinking and do the research about the Cybermen and the stuff they have, it just becomes very clear the Borg are outmatched. Very easily. The Borg are outmatched. But that's going to be it from me today in this response video. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with Fiction Rant? Do you think I'm stupid? Do you agree with me? Do you think he's stupid? I don't know. Who's stupid? Let me know in the comments below. But I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.